Welcome! You're listening to the Uncharted Lancaster podcast, where we explore the hidden histories, forgotten places, and long-buried secrets of Lancaster County. Using modern digital storytelling tools, each episode brings a new piece of local lore to life, revealing the strange, the surprising, and the story's history left behind. Let's begin.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are doing something a little different today.
I think so, yeah.
Usually when we talk about the American frontier, and specifically the early 18th century, we have a very specific set of images that pop into our heads.
Oh, absolutely.
You'll picture the log cabin, the fur trapper, maybe the rough, done-tumble soldier trying to survive in the woods. It's a very masculine, very gritty, physical aesthetic.
It's the Daniel Boone archetype, right? We think of the frontier as a place where, physical strength was the only currency that really mattered. If you couldn't chop a tree or shoot a bear, you were essentially dead weight.
You were a liability. But today, we are going to completely dismantle that stereotype. We are traveling back to the banks of the Susquehanna River, what we now call the Susquehanna, in the 1720s and 30s.
A wild time.
And our protagonist isn't a grizzled frontiersman. She is a Quaker woman named Susanna Wright. And the stack of research we have on her is, honestly, it's mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing is the right word. Susanna Wright is one of those historical figures who just should admit she simply shouldn't exist if you believe the standard textbooks.
She doesn't fit the mold.
Not at all. She was a paradox. She lived on the absolute bleeding edge of the dangerous Pennsylvania frontier in a place described at the time as wild and virtually uninhabited. Yet simultaneously, she was a high-level intellectual known as a blue stocking.
Right. We're definitely going to unpack that term.
We have to. She was a legal scholar, a medical practitioner, a poet, and this is my favorite part, a pioneer of the silk industry.
A silk industry mogul in the middle of the woods. I mean, it sounds like fiction.
It really does.
But the mission of this deep dive isn't just to, list her achievements like a resume. We want to understand the how. How does a woman born in 1697 manage to build a life of such profound independence and influence in an era that was, legally designed to keep women dependent and silent?
That is the central question. And to answer it, we have this incredible array of primary sources. We're looking at historical excerpts regarding her home, the Wrights Ferry Mansion.
Which is still standing, by the way.
Still there. We also have the actual correspondence she exchanged with titans of history like Benjamin Franklin and Benjamin Rush. And perhaps most intimately, we have analyses of her surviving poetry, which gives us a look right into her internal monologue.
So if you're listening to this and wondering, why should I care about a Quaker lady from the 1700s? Here's the pitch.
Let's hear it.
This is the ultimate story of self-education. It's about networking before the internet existed. It's about leveraging every single scrap of a resource you have to build a fortress of independence. Whether you're an entrepreneur or just someone trying to carve out your own path, Susanna Wright wrote the playbook.
She really did. And to understand that playbook, we have to start at the beginning. Because she didn't just, sprout from the Pennsylvania soil. She brought a very specific cultural toolkit with her from England.
Okay, so let's unpack that early life. She wasn't born in the colonies.
No, not at all. She was born on August 4th, 1697, in Warrington, Lancashire, England. Her parents were John and Patience Wright.
Now, if you look at the demographic data of that time, being born a girl in 1697, that usually meant your education would be pretty limited, right?
Limited to domestic skills, spinning, cooking, maybe basic reading if you were very lucky. But the Wrights were Quakers.
And that distinction is crucial, isn't it?
It changes everything. The Society of Friends, the Quakers, had a theological belief in the inner light.
Okay, what does that mean in practical terms?
It means they believed that the capacity for spiritual and intellectual growth was present in everyone, regardless of gender. So, as a consequence, they believed in educating their daughters just as much as their sons.
So while other girls her age were being discouraged from book learning,
Susanna was likely encouraged to read, to think, and most importantly, to question from a very young age. It was part of her religious upbringing.
So she arrives in the world with a real head start, intellectually speaking.
Exactly. The family emigrated to Pennsylvania in 1714. Susanna would have been around 16 or 17 years old, a teenager.
And where did they land first? Not the frontier right away.
No, not at all. They initially settled in Chester, Pennsylvania, which is near Philadelphia. At that time, Chester was relatively established. It wasn't the wild frontier yet. It was a civilized, comfortable Quaker community. They lived there for about a decade.
But then tragedy strikes the family, and this seems to be the first major pivot point in her life.
It is. Her mother, Patience, died around 1721 or 1722. Now, we have to look at the sociology of an 18th century family to understand what this really meant.
The role of the matriarch doesn't just disappear.
It gets inherited. And Susanna was the eldest child. So in her mid-20s, she essentially became the mother figure for the entire family.
That's a heavy burden to place on someone so young.
It was immense. She wasn't just keeping house, she was actively raising her siblings. And you have to remember, there was a massive age gap in the family. Her youngest brother, James, was 16 years her junior.
So she's basically raising a toddler.
She's raising a toddler while managing her father's household, managing the finances, everything. This experience, you have to think, forged a very specific kind of resilience and leadership capability in her. She was the manager. She was the one making sure the household survived and thrived.
So she's in Chester, she's running the household, things are stable. But then around 1726 or 1728, the family decides to pack up and move to what was called Susquehanna Town on Susquehanna. This is modern-day Columbia, Pennsylvania.
And we really need to pause and visualize what this move meant.
Yeah, this isn't like hiring a moving van.
Not even close. Today, moving from Chester to Columbia is a short drive on a highway. In 1726, it was a journey into the void. There were no access roads. The forests were ancient and dense. They were moving away from the safety of the established Quaker community in Chester into a region that was politically volatile and physically dangerous.
Which brings up the big question, why do it? If you're comfortable in Chester, why drag your entire family, including young children, to the middle of nowhere? Was it just about getting cheap land?
Land was part of it, of course. But there is a much, much bigger game being played. It was geopolitical.
Geopolitical, in the Pennsylvania backwoods.
Absolutely. At this time, the boundaries of the colonies were not set in stone. They were suggestions, really.
Yeah.
And Pennsylvania and Maryland were locked in a heated, sometimes violent dispute over who actually owned the land along the Susquehanna River.
Oh, right. This was Croisep's War.
Also called the Conojocular War in some phases. It was a nasty border conflict. People were getting shot over property lines.
So the government of Pennsylvania needed people on the ground. They needed bodies.
Precisely. James Logan was the colonial secretary at the time. He was a brilliant man, essentially the mastermind behind Pennsylvania's colonial operations. He needed loyal subjects to settle that land to act as well as human flagpoles.
Human flagpoles, I like that.
If Pennsylvanians are living there, farming there, and paying taxes there, then it's Pennsylvania's land. So Logan specifically encouraged 3 Quaker families to move west: the Wrights, the Barbers, and the Blunstons.
So Susanna wasn't just a settler. She was a strategic asset for the colony.
She was part of a forward operating base, in modern terms. These families were there to affirm Pennsylvania's sovereignty, and because of that, they had the backing of James Logan, which becomes very important later for Susanna's intellectual life. But physically, on a day-to-day basis, they were on their own.
Let's talk about the physical reality of what they built. They established Wright's Ferry in 1730. When I hear the word ferry, I picture a boat with a ramp, maybe a cable, guiding it across a river.
You need to delete that image from your mind entirely. This was the raw frontier. The ferry that Susanna's family operated on her 100-acre tract of land was primitive and, frankly, terrifying.
Okay, describe it.
The sources describe it as consisting of 2 dugout canoes lashed together with planks.
2 canoes tied together. That was the entire infrastructure.
That was the high-tech solution of 1730. If a traveler came through with a wagon, which was the main way of moving goods, they couldn't just roll it onto a deck. The ferrymen had to carefully position the wagon so the wheels rested inside the canoes. It was an incredibly precarious balancing act.
I can just see the whole thing tipping over.
And it did. If the weight shifted or a horse got spooked, the whole thing could flip. Your wagon, your goods, your livelihood, all at the bottom of the Susquehanna.
That sounds dangerous enough for cargo. But what about livestock? You can't put a cow in a canoe.
No, and the method for moving cattle is the stuff of nightmares. We have anecdotes describing this in detail. To get a herd of cattle across the river, a canoeist would tie a rope around the neck or horns of the led animal.
Sure.
He would then paddle across, literally dragging the animal through the water. The hope, and it was just a hope, was that the rest of the herd would see their leader swimming and decide to follow.
I can see so many ways that goes wrong. I mean, what if the led cow panics?
It went wrong often. The Susquehanna is not a lazy river. It has strong currents, hidden rocks, and eddies. If that lead animal got confused or panicked or caught in a current, it might start swimming in circles.
And the rest of the herd follows it in a circle.
Cows are herd animals. If the leader spirals, they all spiral. You could lose an entire herd just from exhaustion and drowning in the middle of the river. It was a constant risk.
It really paints a picture of the stakes, doesn't it?
This
This wasn't a hobby farm. This was a high-risk, high-reward economic hub.
And it was a hub. Despite the danger, Wright's Ferry became the gateway to the West. It was the bottleneck that everyone had to pass through if they were heading to the Ohio Valley or down into Virginia. The complex grew to include a tavern, a blacksmith shop, and grazing fields for the travelers' horses and livestock.
And Susanna owned the land. This was all happening on her property.
Her brothers, James and John, ran the day-to-day ferry operations, but Susanna was at the center of this bustling, chaotic, muddy commercial enterprise.
So keep that image in your mind. The mud, the drowning cows, the rough travelers, the noise of the tavern. And now, let's pivot to part 2. The mind of the Susquehanna Muse. Because right in the middle of all this chaos sits Susanna Wright, and she's doing something completely incongruous with her surroundings.
This is the contrast that just captivates historians.
Yeah.
While she is living in this rugged environment, initially in a log house, later a more refined stone mansion, she is maintaining an intellectual life that would have been impressive in London or Paris, let alone the woods of Pennsylvania.
It's astonishing. She was fluent in French, for starters.
Fluent in French, proficient in Latin and Italian. That's a serious linguistic range for anyone, anywhere at that time.
And she didn't just stick to European classics, did she?
No, and this is what makes her so practical. She applied her linguistic skills to her immediate environment. She studied the regional Native American dialects. She wanted to understand the people she was living alongside, not just as neighbors, but on their own terms.
This level of intellectual activity earned her a nickname, right?
Yeah. Yes, she was known as the blue stocking of the Susquehanna. Now, we should probably define that term because it has a very specific history.
Please do.
The blue stockings were an informal group of intellectual women in 18th century England. They met in salons to discuss literature and art instead of, playing cards or gossiping, which was the expected female pastime.
So it was a kind of intellectual protest group.
In a way, and over time, the term blue stocking became a catch-all for any woman who was learned and intellectual. Sometimes men use it as an insult, implying a woman was unfeminine or boring. But for Susanna and her circle, it was worn as a badge of honor.
But how do you maintain that level of scholarship in the woods? There's no university nearby, there's no lending library.
You build your own supply chain. It's that simple. Susanna was an avid consumer of books. She ordered them directly from London booksellers. And who was one of her key contacts in this transatlantic logistics network?
I have a feeling I know this name.
A young printer and postmaster in Philadelphia named Benjamin Franklin.
I love that. Benjamin Franklin as the 18th century Amazon Prime, delivering books to her door.
It makes perfect sense. Franklin was the hub of information in Philadelphia. If you wanted the latest treatise from Europe or a new book of poetry, you went through Franklin. And we know what she was ordering.
She wasn't reading light novels.
Not at all. She was ordering heavy hitters. John Milton, Alexander Pope, Jonathan Swift. She was reading French dramatists like Racine and Corneille. She was even reading Fenelon and, get this, travel analyses of Africa. She had a global perspective while sitting on her porch in Pennsylvania.
And she had a mentor, too. We mentioned James Logan earlier as the guy who sent them to the frontier, but their relationship was much deeper than just landlord and tenant.
Much, much deeper. James Logan was a genuine polymath. The man knew 6 languages, including Arabic and Hebrew. He possessed one of the finest private libraries in the American colonies.
And he saw something in Susanna.
He recognized a kindred spirit. He took her under his wing, intellectually speaking. He sent her books from his personal collection and actively encouraged her French studies, correcting her translations and discussing texts with her via mail.
There's a funny detail in the notes about their book exchange, isn't there?
It's very relatable. It makes them feel so human. Logan actually complains in one of his letters that Susanna was slow to return the books he loaned her.
That is fantastic. It's not just historical figure A wrote to historical figure B. It's 2 friends bickering over an overdue library book.
It shows that she wasn't just a passive recipient of his wisdom. She was a peer. She held on to the books because she was using them, analyzing them, probably arguing with the authors in the margins.
And her intellect wasn't just theoretical, was it? She wasn't just reading books.
No, she was a scientist at heart, a true Enlightenment thinker. She studied the local flora and fauna meticulously, writing essays on her findings.
And that scientific curiosity spilled over into medicine.
Out of sheer necessity. Again, you have to think about the setting. There are no doctors. There's no clinic down the road. If you get sick or injured at Wright's Ferry, you are on your own.
So she stepped up.
She studied the medicinal uses of herbs, both European traditions she would have read about, and Native American remedies she learned locally from her neighbors. She started formulating her own medicines, creating her own pharmacopoeia.
So she became the town doctor.
Effectively, yes. Neighbors would come to her with their ailments, their injuries, their children's fevers. She was the primary healthcare provider for the entire settlement. It's another example of how she filled the vacuum of the frontier with her own competence.
So we have the linguist, the librarian, and the doctor. But now we come to the part of the outline that I think is the most surprising. Part 3, the silk pioneer. Because when I think of colonial Pennsylvania, I think of wheat, I think of timber, maybe some livestock. I do not think of silk.
And that is exactly why this story is so important. Susanna Wright established the very first silk industry in Pennsylvania. To understand why, you have to understand the political economy of the time.
Mercantilism.
Exactly. The colonies were resource-rich, but industry-poor. They were completely dependent on Great Britain for manufactured goods, particularly textiles.
Which was by design, right. The British wanted the colonies to be a captive market for British goods.
It was the whole point of the colonial system. But the colonists were beginning to chafe under that dependency. There was a growing movement for colonial self-sufficiency. The idea was, if we can make our own cloth, our own glass, our own metalwork, we don't need to rely on London for everything.
So for Susanna, raising silkworms wasn't just a quirky hobby. It was a political act.
It was an economic statement of independence. And she didn't just dabble in it, she went all in. We know she raised hops, hemp, flax, and indigo, all textile or dye crops, but silk was her magnum opus. At one point, she was managing 1,500 silkworms.
1,500 worms. I don't know much about sericulture, but that sounds incredibly labor-intensive.
It is unbelievably finicky. Silkworms are delicate creatures. They need a constant supply of fresh mulberry leaves. They're incredibly sensitive to temperature changes, and Pennsylvania is not a tropical environment like China. The cool climate posed a major problem.
Especially when the worms were ready to spin their cocoons, I imagine.
That was the bottleneck. The cool, damp air could ruin the silk. So what did she do?
She innovated.
She did. She couldn't change the weather, so she changed the process. She developed a new method using specially created paper cones. She would place the worms in these cones to spin, which protected them from the elements and allowed for a cleaner, better harvest of the silk thread. It was an engineering solution to an agricultural problem.
And the results weren't just good for the frontier, they were world-class.
They absolutely were. Her raw silk was dyed locally and then sent to England to be woven into cloth. And the people who wore this cloth, it's a who's who of the 18th century.
Okay, give us the list. This is amazing.
Well, the folklore, which is supported by some historical records, suggests that Benjamin Franklin, ever the promoter of American industry, took a piece of her cloth to England as a gift for Queen Charlotte.
The Queen of England wearing silk grown by a Quaker woman in the Pennsylvania woods.
That's the story. And it's reported that Queen Charlotte was so impressed she had a gown made from 60 yards of Susquehanna silk.
60 yards. That is an incredible amount of fabric. That's a serious royal commission.
It is, and it wasn't just royalty. General Geoffrey Amherst, who was the commander-in-chief of all British forces in North America during the 7 Years' War, famously wore stockings made of her silk.
Talk about brand placement. If the top general and the queen are wearing your product, you've made it.
And she was recognized for it officially back home. In 1771, the Philadelphia Silk Society awarded her a prize of 10 pounds, a significant sum for raising the largest number of cocoons by a single individual. She proved that it could be done. She proved that Pennsylvania didn't just have to be a farm for wheat, it could be a center of fine industry.
It's just amazing to think about her managing this delicate, high-end operation while cattle are drowning in the river a few hundred yards away. The contrast is just constant with her.
It is, and that competence, that ability to manage complex systems, is what led directly to her role in our next section. Part 4, the power broker. Because Susanna wasn't just making cloth, she was effectively running the legal system for the entire region.
The notes describe her as the prothonotary. That's a word you don't hear often. What does it actually mean?
Technically, a prothonotary is the principal clerk of a court. But in the context of the frontier, her role was so much bigger than that. She was the legal anchor for the whole community.
Because most people couldn't read or write.
Exactly. You have to remember, most of the people settling in this region were illiterate. They were farmers, laborers, new immigrants from Germany or Ireland who couldn't read or write in English, let alone understand the complexities of British property law.
So they were incredibly vulnerable to being cheated.
Extremely. If you can't read a deed, you can be cheated out of your land. If you can't write a will, your family's future is completely at risk. Susanna stepped into that gap. She prepared wills, deeds, indentures for apprentices, and contracts for her neighbors.
She was the gatekeeper of legacy and property for an entire community.
That's a perfect way to put it. If you bought 50 acres of land, Susanna probably wrote the deed. If you were dying and wanted to leave your farm to your son, Susanna wrote your will. She ensured that the legal machinery of the colony actually functioned in this remote area.
And because of that legal authority, she became an arbitrator.
A natural extension of her role, like an unofficial judge, yes. If two neighbors were arguing over a property line or a debt or a stray cow, they wouldn't wait for a circuit judge who might only pass through once or twice a year.
They'd just go see Susanna.
They'd go to Susanna. She would hear both sides of the case, consult the law, and settle the dispute.
That requires an immense amount of trust from the community. For a community of rough, often traditional European men to listen to the legal judgment of a woman, that speaks volumes about her reputation for competence and fairness.
It proves that on the frontier, competence trumps prejudice. They listened to her because she was right, she knew the law, and she was fair. And that fairness extended to her dealings with Native Americans as well.
Right. She wasn't just dealing with settlers. She was mediating between cultures.
She had to. She counseled local Indians, who also came to her with legal issues, and she mediated disputes between them and the colonists. She lived at a strategic crossroads, and she understood better than anyone that peace was good for business and, more importantly, good for survival. But sadly, that peace was often shattered.
And this brings us to a darker part of the story, the Paxton Boys.
Yes. In 1764, the frontier just exploded into horrific racial violence. A vigilante group known as the Paxton Boys began roaming the region, massacring Native Americans, even those who were peaceful and had converted to Christianity. It was a truly horrific chapter in Pennsylvania history.
And Susanna was right in the middle of it.
She was. And she didn't just hide and hope it would pass. She acted. She wrote a letter to a merchant in Lancaster, essentially acting as a whistleblower or an intelligence source for the authorities.
What does she report?
She reported that these vigilantes were not just targeting Native Americans, but also their white sympathizers, people who tried to protect them. She specifically mentioned that there were direct threats being made against her own brother, James.
So she's running an intelligence network in what is essentially a war zone.
She is providing situational awareness to the authorities, trying to prevent more bloodshed. And this isn't the only time she acted as a strategic advisor. We have to talk about the French and Indian War and the doomed Braddock expedition.
This is the famous story involving Franklin again, isn't it?
It is. In 1753, the British General Braddock is preparing this massive expedition to try to take Fort Duquesne, which is now Pittsburgh. His army is a mess, and he is drastically short on supplies, especially wagons and horses.
And Benjamin Franklin is tasked with fixing this logistical nightmare.
He is. So he comes to the region to try to find wagons and horses for the army. And where does he go first? He goes straight to Susanna Wright.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
History Analyzed is a podcast which explains in convincing detail how Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, how Columbus changed the world, why Neville Chamberlain was right, that the sole cause of the Civil War was slavery, how Hernan Cortez conquered the Aztec Empire, and explains the tragedies of the Dust Bowl, the Irish potato famine, and the Black Death. History Analyzed covers many more subjects. You can find History Analyzed on all podcast apps. I'm the host, Mark Palmer, asking you to please give History Analyzed a try. Thank you.
He doesn't go to the mayor or some local militia captain.
He goes to the person who knows the people and holds the real influence. Susanna advised him. She told him not to just demand supplies from these stubborn German farmers, but to call the township leaders together and negotiate. She used her influence to grease the wheels.
You know, it worked.
Because of her advice and her local influence, Franklin was able to secure 150 wagons and horses from the region. It may have saved the expedition, at least initially.
That is soft power in action. She holds no official office, she wears no uniform, but she can mobilize an army supply chain better than the army can itself.
Precisely. She was a power broker. But we shouldn't pretend that her gender was never an issue. There was pushback from some quarters.
There's a great quote about an election, isn't there?
Oh, it's perfect. In 1758, she got involved in some local election campaigning, supporting a candidate she favored. A male politician on the other side was recorded grumbling about her behavior. He said she was acting so unbecoming and unfemale apart.
Unfemale. He was basically saying, get back in the kitchen.
Essentially, he was offended that a woman was daring to exert political influence. But what strikes me is that she clearly didn't care what he thought. And the men who actually mattered, the Franklins, the Rushes, the Logans, they didn't care either. They respected her intellect far too much to worry about whether her actions were unfemale.
So let's talk about those friendships in part 5. A network of elites. Because these weren't just professional contacts for her. These were real, genuine friends.
They absolutely were. The friendship with Franklin was lifelong and very warm, and you can see that warmth in the gifts they exchanged over the years.
It wasn't just business.
Not at all. Franklin knew she was a fellow scientist, a fellow tinkerer. So when he was in London, he would send her the latest gadgets, thermometers, new almanacs, special candles made from bayberry wax that burned cleaner. He treated her as an intellectual peer, a fellow inquirer into the nature of things.
And she sent him a taste of home in return.
She did. She would send him Susquehanna salmon, which was probably shad, pickled to survive the long journey across the Atlantic, and baskets of the best local apples. The letters specify Spitzenbergs and Pippins.
It's a lovely image, isn't it? Benjamin Franklin in a London drawing room, eating a pickled fish from the Susquehanna, thinking of his friend Susanna on the frontier.
It really is. And then there's Benjamin Rush. For those who might not know, remind us who he is. Benjamin Rush is a titan of the founding era. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, a Surgeon General of the Continental Army, arguably the most famous and influential physician in early America. He was a man who knew everyone who mattered.
And he was a fan of Susanna.
A huge fan. He visited her in 1784 when she was quite old, near the end of her life. He wrote in his journal about meeting the famous Susie Wright.
Susie? That's surprisingly casual and affectionate for a formal man like Rush.
It shows real affection and familiarity. He celebrated her wit, good sense, and valuable improvements of mind. And there's a moment in his journal that I find really touching and revealing.
What's that?
Susanna confided in him. She told him that she could not live without her books.
That is the core of her identity, isn't it?
Oh,
After everything, the fairy, the silk, the law, it comes back to the books. I cannot live without my books.
It defines her completely. But she wasn't just friends with the famous men. This is important. She was also a mentor to other women. She was part of an influential female literary circle that included women like Hannah Griffiths, Milka Martha Moore, and Deborah Norris Logan.
Tell us about that circle. Was it like an 18th century book club?
A very high-level one. They were all writers themselves. They shared poems and essays and letters. They critiqued each other's work. Hannah Griffiths, who was a very talented political poet, explicitly viewed Susanna as a mentor. They all looked up to her.
They had a name for her, didn't they?
They called Susanna the Susquehanna Muse. She was the remote matriarch of this intellectual sorority, dispensing wisdom from her home on the frontier.
Which brings us to her own writing. We've established she was a legal scholar, a silk mogul, a doctor, a farmer. But her poetry, that's where we get to see her soul and her radical politics. This brings us to part 6, independence and the divine law.
This is, for me, the most radical and exciting part of her legacy. But to understand her poetry, you first have to understand her most important life choice. Susanna Wright never married.
Which, in the 1700s, was often seen as a failure or a personal tragedy for a woman.
But for Susanna, it was a strategy for independence. To understand why, we have to talk about the legal concept of coverture.
Coverture. Break that down for us. What did it mean in practice?
Coverture was the legal doctrine inherited from English common law. It essentially said that upon marriage, a woman's legal identity was covered or absorbed by that of her husband. A married woman, known as a feme covert, could not own property in her own name.
So anything she brought into the marriage became his.
Instantly. She couldn't sign contracts. She couldn't sue or be sued. She couldn't keep her own wages if she worked. She couldn't even write a valid will without her husband's permission. She ceased to exist as a legal person.
So if Susanna had married, the fairy, the 100 acres of land, the silk business, everything, would have legally belonged to her husband.
Exactly. Her economic and legal independence would have vanished the moment she said, "I do." And she knew the law better than anyone, remember? She wrote the contracts. She knew exactly what marriage would cost her. So she chose to remain a femme sole, a single woman with a legal identity.
But to do that, you need money. You can't be independent if you're destitute and reliant on your family.
Correct. And this is where her close friend Samuel Blunston comes in. Blunston was one of the original Quaker settlers, a fellow leader, and a very close companion of hers.
People have speculated about their relationship.
They have. We don't know if they were romantic partners, but they were clearly devoted to one another. And they never married. When Blunston died in 1745, he did something remarkable. He left his mansion, Belmont, and a life interest in his extensive lands to Susanna.
What does life interest mean in this context?
It means she didn't just inherit the property to sell it. She had the right to use it, live on it, and profit from it for the rest of her natural life. This bequest gave her total, unassailable financial security.
So when her own father died a few years later in 1749,
she didn't have to rely on her brothers or go searching for a husband to support her. She was the mistress of Belmont. She had the house, the money, and the legal status to be completely and utterly free.
And she used that freedom to write poetry that questioned the very foundations of gender roles in her society.
She did. Now, she didn't write for publication. Women rarely did then. It was seen as unseemly. But she wrote for her circle of friends. And the content is explosive. Let's look at the poem titled To Eliza Norris at Fairhill.
This poem is basically a takedown of the entire patriarchy, right?
It is a systematic, logical dismantling of the argument for male superiority. At the time, the prevailing view, reinforced by the church and the state, was that men ruled over women by divine law, that God himself had ordained it so. Susanna attacks this premise head-on.
What does she say? How does she argue against it?
She writes, and this is a direct quote, "But womankind call reason to their aid and question when or where that law was made."
I love that line. It's so pointed. She's asking for the citation. Show me the law. Show me your sources.
Exactly. It's a lawyer's argument. She calls the idea of divine male rule a plausible pretense urged with little sense. She's using the language of the Enlightenment reason to fight against the established religious and social quo. She argues that reason rules in everyone the same.
And then she delivers the knockout punch.
There is no sex and soul.
Just let that.
Yeah.
Let that sink in. There is no sex and soul. That is an incredibly profound statement for the 1740s.
It's a radical theological and philosophical statement. She is arguing that the core of a human being, the soul, the mind, is genderless. Therefore, the capacity for reason is genderless and equal. And if the capacity for reason is equal, then men have no natural or divine right to rule over women. It is a demand for absolute equality based on the very nature of the soul itself.
She also wrote about the practical dangers of marriage in another poem, Carolina, a Young Lady.
Yes, that poem is ostensibly about a father forbidding his daughter from seeing young men, from courting. But Susanna uses it to make a brilliant point about autonomy and virtue. She writes, "There is no virtue when not in our power."
What does she mean by that?
She means that if you are forced to be good or chaste because your father locks you in a room, that's not virtue, that's just imprisonment. True virtue requires the freedom to choose. You have to have the power to say yes and the power to say no for your choice to have any moral meaning.
And she warns women about the trap of romance, of flattery.
She does. She warns that men use soft, soothing flattery as a tool to become tyrants over women's hearts. And she celebrates her friend Eliza's decision to remain single. She writes, "Bless that choice which led your bloom of youth." She completely reframed spinsterhood. It wasn't a sad state of being left behind. It was a triumphant choice for freedom and self-possession.
It is just amazing to hear these thoughts coming from a woman living in a stone house on the frontier 250 years ago. It feels so incredibly modern.
It reminds us that feminism isn't a 20th century invention. These conversations about autonomy, equality, and the risks of patriarchal marriage were happening by candlelight in the 1700s. Susanna Wright wasn't just reading about these ideas, she was living those questions.
Let's look at the end of her life. She lived to be a very old woman for that time.
She did, a very long life. She lived to be 87 or 88, dying on December 1st, 1784. And you just have to stop and think about what she witnessed in that lifetime.
The entire birth of a nation.
Everything. She arrived when Pennsylvania was a remote colony of the British Empire. She lived through the French and Indian War. She saw the rise of the independence movement. She saw the entire Revolutionary War unfold. She saw the birth of the United States of America. She was there for the whole thing.
And even at the end, despite some physical decline, she was still sharp.
Yes. We know from Benjamin Rush's journal, from his visit just months before she died, that her wit was still sharp. He was still impressed by her mind. She never lost that intellectual spark that defined her entire life.
And the house.
Huh.
Wright's Ferry Mansion.
It's still there. If you go to Columbia, Pennsylvania today, you can visit it. It was built in 1738. It was lovingly and meticulously restored by the von Hess family and a famous preservationist named George Edwin Brumbaugh.
And it's not just an empty shell. It gives you a sense of her life.
Oh, absolutely. It's a museum now, and it's incredible because it reflects her sophisticated tastes. Inside this frontier house, you find beautiful English glass, fine ceramics, elegant textiles. It serves as a physical testament to her life's paradox. She didn't just survive the wilderness, she civilized it. She brought the entire world to her doorstep on the Susquehanna.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. From the dangerous ferry to the silk industry to the radical poetry. If we have to synthesize Susanna Wright's life into a single takeaway, what is it?
I think the key is to view her not as a recluse, but as a hub. She was a connector.
Unpack that.
She connected the wilderness to the British Crown through her silk industry. She connected the illiterate farmers on the frontier to the rule of law through her work as a prothonotary. And she connected the present to the future of women's rights through her powerful private poetry.
She was the internet of the Susquehanna.
That's a great analogy. She was a node. She processed information, she distributed resources, and she facilitated communication between worlds that otherwise wouldn't have touched. She made the frontier function.
And she did it all on her own terms.
That's the most inspiring part, isn't it? She defined colonial self-sufficiency not just for the emerging nation, but for herself as a woman. She proved that a woman could be a scholar, a business leader, and a political influence without a husband and without living in a capital city.
So here's a final thought to leave you with as we wrap up. We mentioned that Susanna didn't write for fame. She didn't publish her poems. She didn't even keep copies for herself.
A fact that keeps historians up at night.
The only reason we know her poetry exists, the only reason we can quote that incredible line, "There is no sex and soul," is because her friend, Milka Martha Moore, thought her poems were important enough to copy by hand into her personal scrapbook, her commonplace book.
It's a terrifying thought, historically speaking, the fragility of it.
Right. If that one scrapbook hadn't survived, or if Milka hadn't bothered to copy those specific pages, this entire internal life of Susanna Wright would have vanished. We would know her name from land deeds, maybe a footnote in a Franklin biography, but we wouldn't know her mind. We wouldn't know her heart.
Which really raises the question, how many other blue stockings of the frontier were there? How many other brilliant women were running settlements, conducting scientific experiments, and writing philosophy in private, but their friends didn't have scrapbooks?
How many voices were simply lost to time? We might never know. But we do know about Susanna Wright, and that is a story worth knowing and worth telling.
Absolutely, a remarkable life.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Uncharted Lancaster podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating or review wherever you listen. It really helps more people discover the show. For more fascinating local history, visit unchartedlancaster.com. And if you'd like to go deeper, check out one of Adam Zern's books at unchartedlancaster.com/books. Until next time, keep exploring.